He's old. Just leave the gifts, he'll forget by tomorrow. That's what my son texted while I stood outside his mansion on Christmas morning holding presents for my grandkids. They locked the door, laughed, ate Margaret's pecan pie recipe while I froze on the porch I helped pay for. And just when I turned to leave, the doorbell inside rang. Not mine, theirs. And with it came the lawyer, and the papers to take everything I owned. But they forgot one thing. I still remember how to build and how to document. I let them sign, I took photos, and I walked away with proof they'd never see coming. Now ask yourself, who really got left outside? My name is Harold Whitaker, and I'm 75 years old. Each morning I wake in the same quiet house where Margaret and I raised our family, keeping it spotless with her favorite pine and orange oil cleaners. My eldest son, Richard, who used to bring me blueprints for advice, now hosts Christmas dinner at his new mansion, the one I helped him finance back when gratitude still softened his voice. My daughter Sarah follows his lead these days, while my younger son Thomas stays carefully neutral. After 40 years in contracting, I kept one habit Margaret always praised: documenting everything with photos and dates in my leather notebook. The smiles feel different at Richard's house now, stretched thin like winter shadows. But let me start from the beginning. I balanced those wrapped presents like a house of cards as I made my way across Richard's slick driveway. You know the kind of winter morning. Breath hanging in clouds, snow squeaking under your feet. The mansion loomed ahead, all limestone and copper gutters, with those fancy floodlights washing up the stone columns. The wreath on the door was bigger than our old living room. Window, decorated with ribbons that probably cost more than my first truck. Funny how life circles back, isn't it? I'd taught Richard everything about proper foundations when he was just a teenager, hanging around my job sites. Now here I stood at his door, my arms full of carefully chosen gifts, model planes for the grandkids, Margaret's cookie tins filled with her exact recipe. The smell of prime rib drifted out between the door seams, rich and promising, mixing with wood smoke from the 3 chimneys. I heard laughter inside, muffled behind that frosted glass. Sarah's high pitch, Thomas's rumble, and Richard holding court like he always did these days. My knuckles rapped the heavy oak door, and I steadied myself against a gust that cut straight through my jacket. The wind had teeth this Christmas morning, I'll tell you that. The thing about that mansion, and this always caught in my throat a bit, was that I'd helped Richard buy it. No paperwork, no interest rates, just a father's savings account opened wide. "Thanks, Dad," he'd said back then, actually hugging me. "I'll make you proud." I never lorded that loan over him, never even brought it up again. Margaret would have said that's what family does. I knocked again, shifting my weight as snow started collecting on my loafers. Should have worn boots, but dress shoes seemed right for Christmas dinner. The door's brass nameplate caught my eye. Whitaker, etched deep in flowing script. My own name transformed into someone else's crest. Margaret would have gotten a kick out of that, probably said something gentle about Richard finding his own way. Setting down the shopping bag, I flexed my right hand to work out the stiffness. Contractors' hands never really retire. They just get more ornery about the cold. I could already picture the first hug, probably little Emma, my youngest granddaughter, who still called me Papa without any hesitation. I smoothed my expression into something welcoming, ready for whatever mood waited on the other side. That's when I heard it. Not the door opening, but the deadbolt sliding. Not to let me in. No, this was the sound of a lock being turned against me. The metallic snap felt like a slap. I stood there, snow starting to dust my shoulders, staring at that brass nameplate that suddenly seemed to mock everything I thought I knew about family. Through the frosted glass, shadows moved like actors in some silent film I wasn't meant to watch. The laughter continued inside, maybe even louder now. You ever have a moment when the world tilts sideways, when everything you thought was solid turns to sand under your feet? My hand rose to knock again, but froze halfway up. The truth was right there in that locked door, in those shadows moving away, in that deadbolt thrown against the father who'd built the foundation of everything they now called their own. I pressed my palm flat against the door, feeling the cold seep into my skin. Margaret's voice whispered in my memory, "Patience, Harold. There's always more to the story." But even she might have struggled to find grace in this moment, watching our family traditions get locked away behind expensive oak and frosted glass. The prime rib smell seemed to sharpen, carrying the warmth of a gathering I was clearly not meant to join. The shopping bag sat in the snow at my feet, bright paper already dampening at the corners. All those carefully chosen gifts, all those memories of Margaret's recipes in those tins, everything I'd brought to share was slowly being buried in white. Through the frosted side panel, I could make out the silhouettes moving like a Christmas pageant. I wasn't invited to direct anymore. My children, Richard, Sarah, and Thomas, raised what looked like wine glasses under that massive chandelier Richard had imported from Italy. Even my sister's boy Billy was there, probably telling one of his insurance sales stories that always ended with a commission check. My phone buzzed in my pocket. For a second, hope flickered. Maybe they'd realized their mistake. Maybe someone's conscience had kicked in. But when I pulled it out, that hope died faster than a poorly mixed concrete batch. The message was from Richard. "Dad, it's best if you don't come in. You're old. This is for the younger generation. You know that feeling when your spirit just sort of deflates like someone stuck a pin in everything you thought was solid and true." My throat got tight, and I had to swallow hard against the burn rising up from my chest. Inside, laughter erupted, the kind that only comes from a joke hitting its mark dead center. Given the timing, I didn't need blueprint specifications to figure out who they were laughing about. My first instinct was to pound that fancy oak door until the hinges rattled, show them exactly how old and weak their father wasn't. My hand even curled into a fist, ready to make some noise they couldn't ignore. But then, Margaret's voice whispered in my memory, clear as the day she'd said it. "Harold, dignity doesn't shout. It stands tall and walks away." The smell of rosemary and roasting meat drifted through the cold air. Margaret's recipe, I'd bet my tool belt on it. Sarah always did like copying her mother's cooking, though she never quite got the proportions right. Too much sage, usually. Today, it was just another reminder of what I was being denied. I looked down at the shopping bag, still sitting there in the gathering snow. 37 years in construction taught me that sometimes the gentlest touch takes the most strength. So I reached down, muscles protesting against the cold, and set those wrapped gifts on the welcome mat with the care I used to use placing the last shingle on a roof. Perfect alignment, corners squared. Maybe they'd recognize that precision when they found them later. The meat smell was really rolling now, mixing with wood smoke and something sweet. Probably Margaret's bourbon pecan pie recipe. Another family tradition they'd borrowed without asking permission. I lifted my hand one last time, thinking to leave a final knock. Not angry, just present. A reminder that their father had stood here, had witnessed everything. That's when I heard it. A chime from inside the house. Not the sharp rap of my knuckles, but the musical tone of their doorbell. The one I definitely hadn't pressed. The effect was like somebody had kicked an anthill. Chairs scraped across hardwood, feet scrambled, and Richard's voice cut through it all. "Kids, quiet down. Now." I stood there, hand still raised, listening to the sudden chaos behind that locked door. Years of handling delicate negotiations on job sites kicked in. My breathing steadied itself, shoulders squared, automatically. Whatever was coming, I'd meet it the way I'd met every challenge in my life, straight-backed and clear-eyed. The lock mechanism clicked, then clicked again as someone reset it. A throat cleared on the other side, a deep baritone I didn't recognize from any family gathering I'd ever hosted. "You want to know something strange?" In that moment, with snow soaking into my dress shoes and my children's betrayals still burning in my chest, I felt an odd sort of calm settle over me. The kind that used to come when I'd spot a serious flaw in a foundation, knowledge that things were about to get complicated, but at least now I knew what I was dealing with. The door handle turned, and I prepared the kind of measured greeting that would have made Margaret proud. Whatever came next, I'd face it with the dignity she'd always said was my true strength. The door swung wide, and I automatically shifted aside. Old habits from job sites, always making room for others to pass. A man in a pristine navy overcoat stepped onto the threshold, leather portfolio tucked under one arm. He wasn't family, that was clear as a level bubble. Everything about him screamed attorney, from his polished shoes to the way he checked his watch like time was money being spent. "Ah, you must be—" He glanced at a paper, frowning. "Mr. Whitaker, Sr.?" I wasn't expecting, well, never mind. I'm here for the scheduled execution of documents, the family's waiting. Know what it's like when puzzle pieces suddenly click together? When you're looking at scattered bits of evidence and boom, the pattern jumps out clear as day. That's what happened as I caught the reflection of his portfolio in the door's glass panel. Gold embossed letters from some downtown firm, but one word stood out like a red flag on a construction site: guardianship. You ever feel your blood run cold? I mean actually feel it, like ice water replacing everything warm inside you. That's what hit me as the pieces fell into place. The Christmas feast, the locked door, the convenient attorney. It wasn't just a family dinner, it was camouflage. A cover operation to strip away my rights while I stood out here freezing my tail off. I'd seen this before, hadn't I? Back when Margaret's sister lost her house to her kids. They'd done it all legal and proper, papers signed while she was confused. Heaven help me. But I'd learned from watching that train wreck. My hands started shaking, and for once I let my voice waver too as I said, I don't understand, Richard, Sarah? Playing confused wasn't hard. The betrayal made my head spin anyway. The attorney's face softened with that special kind of pity reserved for old folks who've lost their grip. He turned to speak to someone inside, giving me the opening I needed. My phone was already in my hand, force of habit, documenting everything, just like I used to do with contracts. Through the side panel, I had a perfect view. The living room lights caught every detail as I snapped photos. The packet's cover page with its damning title, signature blocks lined up neat as fence posts, even the notary seal waiting to make it all official. Richard hovered near the table, pen in hand, gesturing for Sarah to step up next. "Dad's not well," I heard him say. "This is for his own good. For my own good. Isn't that what they always say when they're taking something that isn't theirs?" My fingers worked steady despite the cold, sliding the phone into my jacket's inner pocket, the one Margaret had sewn in special, saying every man needed a secure spot for important things. She'd been right about that, like she was right about so many things. Next came the hard part. I'd watched Margaret fade during those final months, seen how her eyes would go distant, unfocused. I borrowed that look now, letting my gaze drift past the attorney, like I couldn't quite track what was happening. It wasn't all acting. Part of me really couldn't believe this was real. The porch light caught the frost in my hair as I stepped back, playing the part of a confused old man. My gift still sat there on the welcome mat, wrapped in paper Margaret had helped me pick out last year before. "I'm sorry," I whispered to those packages. Sorry I couldn't deliver them properly. Sorry they'd become props in this little drama. As I turned toward the dark street, the attorney's voice drifted out. "Now regarding the declaration of incompetence for Harold Whitaker." Incompetent. That word hit harder than any hammer I'd ever swung, but I kept walking one steady step at a time, like I had somewhere else to be, like I hadn't just witnessed my own children trying to erase everything I'd spent a lifetime building. I didn't make a scene, didn't pound on the door or shout about justice, just let the snow swallow my footsteps as I walked away from that mansion, carrying the heaviest Christmas gift I'd ever received, my pride still wrapped tight and unopened. The drive home felt longer than usual. You know how memories hit you at the strangest times? I kept seeing Margaret's face the day we'd helped Richard with the down payment on that house. "You're too generous," she'd said, but her eyes were proud. Wonder what she'd say now. My kitchen looked exactly like I'd left it that morning, but everything felt different. Funny how betrayal can change the color of familiar things. The coffee pot still had dregs in it, dishes still waited in the rack. Normal stuff. But nothing was normal anymore, was it? I spread my phone on the table, fingers trembling as I pulled up those photos. The pages were clear enough, thank God for modern cameras. There were their signatures neat and confident, right under language about my persisting cognitive decline. Sarah's loops and swirls just like I'd taught her when she was learning cursive. Richard's sharp angles marking the death warrant for my independence. Even my sister's boy Tommy had signed, though he'd barely spoken 10 words to me in the past year. Ever try sleeping when your whole world's turned upside down? I tossed and turned, watching shadows crawl across the ceiling. Margaret's side of the bed stayed cold and empty, like it had for 2 years now, but I'd never felt her absence quite so sharply as I did that night. The banking alert hit my phone at 6:43 a.m. "New authorization review required," it said. "Daily access temporarily restricted." My stomach clenched. They'd moved fast. I dressed carefully that morning, put on my best wool coat, the one Margaret always said made me look distinguished, gathered every piece of ID I owned into a folder: driver's license, passport, social security card, even my old contractor's license. Proof of who I was, who I'd always been. The same teller who'd known me for 15 years, Susan, whose kids' baseball team I'd sponsored, couldn't quite meet my eyes. Her smile was tight, professional. "Mr. Whitaker, perhaps we should arrange a family meeting to discuss your accounts. Have you ever felt the floor drop out from under you?" That's what it felt like when she said "concerns" right after my name. Like I was suddenly standing on air, with nothing solid left to hold on to. The house felt too quiet when I got back. Empty in a way it hadn't since right after Margaret passed. I found myself in the kitchen, opening drawers until I found her recipe cards. The one for mulled cider was right where it always was, her handwriting still clear and steady. "Warm the soul first," she'd always said. "Everything else follows." I followed those instructions like a drowning man follows a lifeline. Measured the cider, added the cinnamon sticks, counted out the cloves. The scent filled the kitchen, but it couldn't quite reach the cold spot in my chest. The voicemails started coming in around noon. Mrs. Peterson from next door. "Harold, dear, if you need anything." Frank from the hardware store. "Hey, Harold. Heard some things." Each message wrapped in that careful, pitying tone people use when they think you're slipping. Like they're talking to a child instead of a man who'd built half the houses in this town. My hand shook as I deleted them one by one. Had to steady myself against the counter when I set the phone face down. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow would be better. Then the second alert came in. Different bank, same message. Account access suspended pending review. They weren't just taking my family. They were taking everything. Morning hit like a slap. I'd barely slept, and the first thing I did was check my accounts on my phone. Ever try counting your losses before coffee? Let me tell you, it's not recommended. The list grew with every refresh. Debit card. Daily limit dropped to pocket change. Wire transfers? Frozen solid. Even my safe deposit box at First National had a new flag. Requires co-signature for access. Fancy way of saying I couldn't get to my own property without someone holding my hand. I tried calling Richard, my eldest, the mastermind behind this circus. Got his voicemail, of course. "Hey, Dad," his text came back 10 minutes later. "Just rest. We've got everything handled." Everything handled. That's what we used to say to clients when we needed them to stop asking questions about their builds. Funny how words change meaning when they're turned against you. You ever notice how a small town shrinks when you're at the center of gossip? Main Street felt about 10 feet long when I headed out for my morning coffee. The diner where I'd eaten breakfast 3 times a week for 20 years might as well have been a theater stage. Conversations dropping to whispers as I walked in, everyone suddenly fascinated by their plates. "Good morning, sir." Jenny, the barista, practically shouted each word like I was not just elderly but deaf. "Would you like your usual?" Been getting the same black coffee there since before she was born. Now she was speaking to me like I might forget how to drink it. The regulars table, Bob, Mike, and Pete, they've got 30 years of shared jokes with me. Today, nothing but sudden interest in their newspapers. Pete actually turned his chair slightly, like he might catch cognitive decline if he looked at me straight on. I sat alone, stirring sugar I didn't want into coffee. I barely tasted. Started counting, you know. How many times had I asked Susan at the bank the same question yesterday? Was I repeating myself these days without noticing? The doubt crept in like winter draft through old windows. The courthouse stood across the street, solid brick and certainty. Margaret used to say courthouses were built so sturdy because justice needs a strong foundation. She had a way with fear, my Margaret. "Make a list," she'd say, "then add some light." She meant a candle usually, but the principle was sound. Illuminate the darkness one step at a time. My hands shook a bit as I opened my phone's gallery. There they were, the photos from Christmas Day. Clear as crystal. The guardianship papers, the signatures, the timestamps on each image. The reality of their betrayal burned away the fog of doubt like sun through morning mist. Sometimes you need to feel the heat of anger, to remember who you are. The copy shop kid barely looked up as I printed everything. 8 crisp pages of evidence, dated and timed. I stapled them together, each punch through paper feeling like a small victory. Borrowed a red pen to mark the dates in the corners, contractor's habit marking every change order. The house was purple with dusk by the time I got home. You know that time of day when everything feels both ending and beginning. Pulled the old file box from under the bed. 2 decades of contracting records. Every receipt, every permit. Margaret used to tease me about keeping dead trees instead of scanning everything. Those dead trees were about to come back to life. The kitchen table had seen 30 years of family dinners. Now it held my battle plans. The yellow legal pad seemed to glow under the overhead light as I wrote one word at the top: fight. My hand was just hovering over the pad, pen ready for the first real note when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Frank Coleman, my old army buddy from '69, holding 2 steaming cups and wearing that same sharp-eyed look he'd get before we'd sweep a building. No smile, no small talk. Just that steady gaze that said he'd heard things and wasn't leaving till we talked. "Thought you might need backup," he said, shouldering past me into the kitchen. "Word gets around fast in this town, and it ain't good words they're spreading about you, Harold." The coffee he set down was from Jimbo's truck stop, strong enough to dissolve a spoon, just like the mud we used to drink on watch. Some habits stick with you through the decades. "You heard right," I said, pulling out a chair. My own flesh and blood left me standing on their porch Christmas Day while they carved up my life inside. My throat tightened, but I kept it steady. "Take a look." I spread the photos across the table, the guardianship papers, the signatures, the timestamps. Frank studied each one with the same focus he once used reading terrain maps. His jaw tightened as he pieced it together. "Classic isolation play," he said, tapping the documents. "Get you labeled incompetent, control the narrative, then lock down your resources while you're still trying to figure out what hit you." He looked up. "They're moving fast because they know you're anything but senile." Something in my chest loosened hearing him say it. Frank had always been good at cutting through confusion to find the tactical truth. The military precision in his voice felt like solid ground under my feet. "We need to build this right," he continued, pulling the legal pad closer. "Sequence of events, evidence chain, witness statements, starting with those bank restrictions. We'll need audit logs, access records, everything with a timestamp." He paused. "You up for this fight?" "Been up since Christmas," I said, and meant it. "Then let's move. I'll ride with you to the banks, be your witness. They try brushing you off, they'll have to brush off both of us." We spent the afternoon building our case like we used to build houses. Methodical, by the book, every detail documented. First Nationals manager got real helpful when Frank mentioned phrases like elder financial abuse and regulatory oversight. We walked out with a stack of transaction records and account access logs. The copy shop saw us twice more. Every document got scanned, every ID verified, every conversation logged on that yellow pad. My hands remembered their old strength as I punched holes and filled a 3-ring binder. 40 years of contracting had taught me the value of paper trails. "There's one piece we're missing," Frank said as evening settled in. "Medical records. If they're pushing this cognitive decline angle, they had to base it on something. Doctor's notes, evaluations, or forgeries," I finished. The thought had been nagging me all day. "Exactly, I made some calls, got you an appointment tomorrow morning at the clinic." "First thing." I nodded, feeling the weight of what we'd built today. The binder sat thick with evidence on the kitchen table, and for the first time since Christmas, my house didn't feel like it was slipping away from me. "Couch is yours if you want it," I told Frank. "Just like old times." He grunted agreement, already reviewing our notes. I set the alarm for 6 a.m. and headed upstairs, knowing my home had a guardian again. Tomorrow's appointment would tell us what we were really up against, whether my kids had simply stretched the truth or manufactured it wholesale. The clinic's answers were waiting just a few hours away. The clinic's waiting room hadn't changed since Margaret's last visit. Same mint green walls, same fluorescent buzz overhead that made everything feel slightly unreal. Frank and I arrived right as they opened, while the morning sun was still trying to warm up the parking lot. You know that antiseptic smell medical places have? Mixed with old magazines and coffee from the nurse's station. It hit me as we walked in, and for a second I was back here holding Margaret's hand, both of us pretending the tests would come back different this time. I cleared my throat. "Patient records request," I told the clerk, sliding over the form we'd prepared. "Harold Whitaker, looking for any assessments or evaluations from the past 6 months." She glanced at my ID, then at Frank, who stood behind me with arms crossed. Looking about as casual as a guard dog. Family member? She asked him. Witness, he replied flatly. That got her attention. She disappeared into the back, and I could hear the whir of a printer starting up. My stomach knotted while we waited. What would we find? Had they really gone that far? The stack she brought back was thin, maybe 6 pages total, but sometimes the worst wounds come from the smallest cuts. Right on top was a cognitive function assessment dated 2 weeks before Christmas. My eyes caught on the physician's signature, Dr. James Morrison. Never heard of him, never met him, sure as hell never had him evaluate me. You recognize that doctor? Frank muttered. I shook my head, scanning down the form. There, under care coordinator, was my eldest son's name, neat and official-looking, like he had any right to coordinate my care without even talking to me about it. Then I turned to the last page, and the air just left me. There was my signature, or what was supposed to be my signature. Shaky, uncertain-looking. Nothing like how I actually write. Next to it, a notary stamp, making it all official. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They were steady as stones as I pulled out my driver's license. Frank leaned in close as we compared them side by side. Look at the H, he said quietly. Yours loops at the top. This one's angular. And the W baseline, yours is straight across, this one wanders. I couldn't even speak. 40 years I'd signed contracts, work orders, deeds. My signature was as much a part of me as my own name. And there it was, forged by my own son, made to look like I was already slipping. The taste in my mouth was like copper pennies. I took out my phone, photographing each page while Frank requested certified copies. The clerk must have sensed something was wrong because she didn't ask any questions, just stamped them and handed them over. The drive home was quiet. Snow had started falling again, big heavy flakes that made the world feel muffled. My mind kept circling back to that signature, that deliberate attempt to make my hand look unsteady. Finally, Frank said it. Forgery. One word. Simple as that. But it changed everything. Made it real in a way even Christmas Day hadn't quite managed. Check the court calendar, Frank added. Need to know our timeline. I pulled up the county courthouse website on my phone. Took a few clicks, but there it was. Guardianship hearing. Harold Whittaker. 3 days away. 3 days to prepare our defense, 3 days to counter a lie they'd been building for weeks, maybe months. 3 days to prove I was still the man who'd built houses, raised children, loved a wife through sickness and health. I felt sick and relieved all at once. Sick that it had come to this. Relieved that we finally had proof, real, solid proof, of what they'd done. Frank pulled into my driveway as the snow picked up. We had work to do, and not much time to do it. Next morning I was up before the sun, muscle memory from decades of job sites kicking in. You know that feeling when a big project's due? When every minute counts. That's where I was, except this build meant more than any house I'd ever framed. Frank was already at the kitchen table, 2 cups of coffee steaming. Let's lay it out like a blueprint, he said. I nodded, spreading our evidence across the table. Just like planning a construction sequence, everything needed its proper order. My hands knew this kind of work. Methodical, precise, no room for shortcuts. Exhibit A, I said, clipping the Christmas Day photos together. The timestamp showed 2:14 p.m., clear as day through that frosted glass. I could still feel the cold seeping into my bones from standing there. Exhibit B, bank notices, arranged by date. The timing told its own story, how fast they'd moved to lock me out after that attorney showed up. Remember what I said about keeping records? Old habits die hard, and thank God for that. Every restriction, every review notice, every patronizing conversation with tellers, all documented, all dated. Exhibit C through E, the clinic papers, including those forged signatures. We laid them side by side with 20 years of legitimate signatures from contracts and deeds. Even a first-year law student could spot the differences. The notary seal caught my eye. Something about it seemed off. Frank noticed too. We pulled up the state database, and there it was. The notary's commission had expired 3 months earlier. Another exhibit for the pile. Exhibit F, my daily log starting from Christmas. Times, dates, conversations, everything written in the same steady hand I'd used for decades of work orders. You ever build a house from the ground up? Each piece has to support what comes next. That's how we arranged our case. Foundation first, then the framework, then every detail squared and plumb. I knew the hearing room layout. Same. Courthouse where I'd filed permits for 40 years. We sketched it out. Judge's bench, witness stand, gallery seating. Frank would sit directly behind me, solid as a bearing wall. Should call your nephew, Frank said quietly. Get it on record. He was right. I dialed Sister's boy's number, kept my voice neutral. Tommy? Need to verify something about Christmas Day. The stammering started immediately. Uncle Harold, we thought... They said, it was for the best. Just need to confirm you were there, son. My pen moved across the legal pad, noting time, date, and every hesitation. I didn't want to sign, but... He trailed off. Thank you, Tommy. That's all I needed. I hung up before anger could crack my voice. Last piece of the puzzle, Margaret's old power of attorney paperwork. She'd been sharp right to the end, had made sure everything was properly revoked. No loose ends, no legal gaps they could exploit. My wife always did think of everything. Frank watched me lay out my court clothes. Dark suit, crisp shirt, the shoes Margaret had helped pick out years ago. I worked the polish in small circles, just like she'd taught me. The leather took on a deep shine under my hands. Her picture sat on the dresser where it always had, next to the watch she'd given me. In the glass, I caught my reflection. Older, sure, but still straight-backed, still clear-eyed. Going to tell it true tomorrow, Margaret, I whispered to her smile. No shouting, no accusations, just facts, plain and simple. It was midnight before we finished the final run-through. Every exhibit labeled, every document copied in triplicate, everything hole-punched and organized in a binder that felt solid as a foundation stone. I set the alarm for dawn. The courthouse opened at 9, and we'd be there, early, ready to build our case one careful piece at a time. Looking at that binder, I remembered what I used to tell my crew. The truth shows in the details. Every joint, every angle, every measurement. They all tell the story of how much care you took. Tomorrow we'd let the details speak for themselves. The courthouse heaters hummed against the January chill, same sound they'd made for 40 years of permit applications. Different stakes today, though. Through the tall windows, morning sun caught the bronze railings, where two bailiffs compared notes on the weekend snow. You know that feeling when you're about to start a big job? When every tool's laid out, every measurement double-checked, but your stomach still does that little flip. I smoothed my tie, the blue one Margaret always said brought out my eyes, and approached the security desk. The guard smiled like he remembered me from contractor days as I signed the visitor log, his badge machine whirred, spitting out my credentials for the day. Right over there, Mr. Whitaker, he said, gesturing to the polished bench by the courtroom doors. Frank settled beside me, solid as a foundation wall. Deep breaths, he murmured. Just like we practiced. The marble hallway echoed with approaching footsteps. I didn't need to look up to know that stride. My eldest, David, moving with that purchased confidence that came with his tailored suit. The rest of the kids flanked him like supporting beams, faces arranged in what they thought passed for concern. Behind them came that same attorney from Christmas, portfolio tucked under his arm. Thinner now. Guess they figured they wouldn't need as much paperwork to finish the job they'd started on my doorstep. My hands wanted to shake. I locked them together in my lap and remembered what Margaret taught me during her treatments. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. The air tasted of lemon polish and old wood. Frank's hand found my shoulder, steady as a level bubble. You've got this, Harold. Truth's all squared up in that binder of yours. The clerk's voice cut through the murmur. In the matter of guardianship petition, Whitaker family. The gallery settled like dust after a saw cut. I studied the judge as we rose, older than David but younger than me. Reading glasses riding low on his nose as he scanned the initial filing. The kind of man who looked like he measured twice before cutting once. The attorney stood first, straightening his tie. Your Honor, we come before you today out of deep concern for Harold Whitaker's declining capacity to manage his affairs. His children have observed concerning patterns of confusion and, if I may, Your Honor, my voice carried, clear and level, contractor steady. The judge nodded. I lifted our binder. I've prepared exhibits documenting the sequence of events, numbered 1 through 6. The evidence cart rolled smooth as I placed each packet, starting with photographs from Christmas Day. When I was deliberately excluded from family dinner, while legal documents were executed without my knowledge. The judge's eyebrows lifted as he studied the time-stamped images. These show the attorney present that day. Yes, Your Honor, the same attorney here today. I moved through our evidence like working down a punch list. Bank restrictions, dated conversations, that forged medical evaluation. The judge's expression sharpened at the signature comparisons. This cognitive assessment, he said, holding the paper at arm's length. Who scheduled this examination? That's what I'd like to know, Your Honor, I replied. I've never met the physician who supposedly evaluated me. The judge turned to my eldest. Mr. Whitaker, the younger, can you explain why your father's signatures don't match his verified documents? And I noticed this notary seal. David shifted in his expensive shoes. The attorney leaned in to whisper something, but the judge held up his hand. Let's have the notary's information on record, he said. And while we're at it, I'd like to hear directly from the physician who performed this evaluation. He peered at David over those reading glasses. I trust you can provide that contact information? I felt the first crack in their carefully constructed wall. Frank's hand pressed my shoulder again, grounding me as the questions continued. You want to know the thing about lies in construction? They never hold up to inspection. Every shortcut, every covered-up flaw eventually shows through. And, right then, watching my son struggle to explain those forged papers, I could see the whole facade starting to crumble. David cleared his throat, adjusting his tie like it was suddenly too tight. Your Honor, we were acting in my father's best interests. The temporary oversight was meant to— The judge's palm rose like a stop sign. Mr. Whitaker, younger, I'm more interested in this notary stamp. Counsel, please provide the logbook entries for December 25th. I couldn't help but notice how David's lawyer suddenly looked less sure of himself. Funny how confidence drains when the foundation starts to shift. While we're waiting on that, I said, pulling out another photo, I'd like to show where I actually was during the time this evaluation claims I sat for cognitive testing. The judge accepted the image, me on that cold porch, timestamp clear as day. This is the same date and time as the supposed medical assessment. Yes, Your Honor. I was standing outside my son's house, locked out of Christmas dinner while they executed documents inside. You know that moment when you're demolishing an old wall and finally find the rot someone tried to hide? That's what the courtroom felt like right then. Mr. Frank Peterson, I nodded toward my friend. He witnessed the aftermath of that day and the subsequent banking restrictions. I'd like to call him now, if I may. Frank took the stand like he was born to it. Military bearing never really leaves a man. Please state your relationship to the parties, the judge directed. Known Harold Whitaker since '69, Your Honor. Served together, stayed friends. I was there when he discovered his accounts had been restricted without notice. And the events of Christmas Day? Frank laid it out clean and straight, no emotion clouding the facts. He described finding me in my kitchen the next morning, the documented phone calls, the bank visits. His voice stayed level when he mentioned how the tellers had been instructed to limit my access. I caught David shifting in his seat, probably remembering how he'd assumed old soldiers wouldn't know how to fight back smart. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees when the judge turned to David's attorney. Counselor, perhaps you can explain why your firm scheduled document execution on Christmas Day. Rather unusual timing. The lawyer started some song and dance about family gathering convenience, but his words sounded hollow against the marble walls. We'll take 20 minutes, the judge announced. I want to review these exhibits thoroughly. As the gallery rustled with movement, I sat back, feeling my heartbeat finally steady. David huddled with his attorney in the AA corner, their whispers sharp as sawdust in the air. My fingers found Margaret's watch smooth and familiar against my wrist. I remembered her words when we picked it out. Simple, reliable, true, just like you, Harold. I'd promised her no bitterness, no matter how this turned out. Some things matter more than winning. Frank leaned in close. You okay? Getting there, I said, watching the clock tick through our recess. Just want it done clean. Those 20 minutes stretched like wet varnish. I caught fragments of David's frantic consultation, character witnesses, and alternative documentation, but kept my eyes forward. A contractor learns patience. You can't rush concrete or justice. The bailiff's all rise snapped through the air like a chalk line. The judge returned, holding that forged evaluation between two fingers like he'd found it under a rotted sill. He cleared his throat, adjusted those reading glasses, and the whole room held its breath. You ever notice how time seems to stop right before the level shows true? That's what this felt like. That perfect moment of suspense before everything either lines up straight or shows its slant. The evidence before this court is clear and disturbing. The judge's voice cut through the tension like a sharp saw through soft pine. The medical evaluation dated December 25th is hereby declared void. Furthermore, this guardianship petition is dismissed with prejudice. My shoulders dropped about 10 pounds of weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. You know that feeling when you finally set down a load that's been wearing you down? Just like that. Additionally, the judge continued, peering over those reading glasses, this matter will be referred to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into potential forgery and fraud charges. I glanced at David. My boy, still my boy despite everything, looked like he'd seen his empire crack right down the middle. His face had gone the color of old drywall, and his attorney was already shuffling papers like he could find an escape clause buried in there somewhere. Your Honor, David's lawyer stood, straightening his tie. Given the family context, perhaps we could discuss alternative resolutions. Counselor, the judge cut in, attempting to strip an elderly parent of his rights through fraudulent means on Christmas Day suggests a particular kind of calculation that this court cannot overlook. The sanctions hearing will be scheduled for next month. Ms. Rodriguez, he nodded to the clerk, please prepare the order restoring Mr. Whitaker's banking authorities immediately. Frank's hand found my shoulder and squeezed. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. Some moments are better left to silence. The clerk approached with a stack of certified copies, blue stamps bright against the white paper. You'll want to take these to your bank today, sir, she said quietly. The judge's order should clear everything up. Thank you, ma'am. I tucked them into my folder, neat and orderly, just like I'd learned running my business all those years. David tried to catch my eye as we filed out, but I kept my focus ahead. Margaret would have wanted me to stay dignified, and right then dignity meant walking straight and staying quiet. The courthouse hallway felt cooler, less pressured. I was adjusting my jacket when I noticed a woman with a press badge waiting by the water fountain. She had that hungry look journalists get when they smell a story. Mr. Whitaker. She stepped forward, notebook ready. Jenny Chen from the Herald. We received an interesting tip about holiday guardianship attempts. Would you care to comment? I thought about Margaret then, how she always said the truth needs no decoration. The facts are simple, I told the reporter. I was locked out of Christmas dinner while my family tried to strip my rights through forged papers. Today the truth prevailed. That's all. She wanted more. They always do. But I've learned from decades of contract work that sometimes the shortest statement hits hardest. The drive home felt different, like when you finish a tough job and know it'll pass inspection with flying colors. Frank followed me in his truck just to make sure everything was settled. In my kitchen, I went through the motions of making tea. Margaret's old ceramic pot, 2 bags of English breakfast, water just off the boil. Some habits comfort more than the drink itself. I stored the court documents in my fireproof safe, right next to Margaret's will and our marriage certificate. Funny how life's biggest moments all end up in the same metal box. My phone had been off during court. When I powered it up, the messages started rolling in. Neighbors mostly. Just heard what happened, can't believe it, and those kids of yours should be ashamed, and let us know if you need anything. Frank watched me scroll through them. Communities, got your back now, Harold. That reporter's going to blow this wide open. I picked up his spare key, the one he'd given me yesterday when we were planning court strategy, and set it on the counter. Keep it, I said. Never know when you might need to check on an old friend. He nodded, understanding everything I wasn't saying. The afternoon sun slanted through my kitchen window as Frank headed out. I sat there with my cooling tea, thinking about tomorrow's paper and what stories it might tell. The morning paper hit my front step with that familiar thud I'd grown used to over 40 years of dawn deliveries. Strange how some sounds stay the same while everything else shifts. I opened the door, coffee mug already warming my hand, and there it was in bold black letters across the top. Christmas Day plot. Son forges papers in failed guardianship grab. Ever built a house from foundation to roof? Takes months of careful work, but you can watch one burn down in an hour. That's what happened to David's reputation that morning. The article laid it out clean as blueprints: the Christmas lockout, the forged medical papers, the judge's fury. Jenny Chen had done her homework too, digging up details about David's business connections and community standing. She'd even tracked down that notary, who was suddenly unavailable for comment. The whole thing read like one of those true crime stories, except this time I knew all the characters by heart. My phone started buzzing before I'd finished my coffee. Neighbors, church folks, even some of my old contracting clients, all calling to check on me, express their shock, share what they'd heard. I kept the conversation short and factual, just like with the reporter. No need to pour gas on a fire that was burning fine on its own. Through the grapevine, I heard David's office was getting flooded with calls. His real estate partners wanted emergency meetings. The country club crowd that used to laugh at his jokes was suddenly reviewing membership standards. You know what they say about reputation taking years to build. Remember that old Christmas carol about comfort and joy? Well, I wasn't feeling much joy, but there was a certain comfort in watching truth do its work without my help, like watching a level find its own balance. Around 10, I drove down to First National with my court papers. The branch manager, different one from last week, practically tripped over himself getting my accounts straight. "Mr. Whitaker, we'll have everything restored immediately," he said, tapping at his keyboard. "Full access, no restrictions, and please accept our sincere apologies for any inconvenience." Funny how inconvenience sounds when it's dressed up in banker's clothes, but I just nodded and signed where he pointed. The weight of my signature felt good again, solid, respected, mine. Back home, I stood in my living room doorway for a long moment. The space felt different now, like a house after you've cleared out all the construction debris. Clean, ready for what comes next. I went to the garage and found what I was looking for under an old drop cloth. Margaret's rocking chair. Small thing, really, just cedar and craftsmanship, worn smooth by years of Christmas Eve spent holding grandkids while she read them stories. The same grandkids who'd stood silent behind their parents at the courthouse yesterday. The chair wasn't heavy, but I took my time carrying it in, set it just right next to the fireplace where it had always belonged. The late morning sun caught the wood grain, and for a second I could smell Margaret's orange oil furniture polish mixed with the cedar. My hand found that spot on the armrest where her wedding ring used to tap in time to carols. 38 years of Christmases, she'd kept rhythm right there. The wood still held that gentle dip, like it was remembering too. The mantel clock ticked steady above me. Margaret's father's clock, the one that never ran fast or slow. Watching its brass pendulum swing, I felt something settle inside me. Not triumph exactly, more like rightness, the kind that comes from standing your ground without letting bitterness take root. I eased down into the rocker, testing its familiar sway. Outside, I could hear cars passing, phones ringing in other houses, the world spinning on with its dramas and verdicts. But in here, peace had moved back in, like it owned the place. "You know something, Margaret?" I said to the quiet room. "Respect is earned. Betrayal destroys itself." The chair kept its gentle motion, and somewhere in the house the heating kicked on with a soft whoosh. Time to let the morning do what mornings do, bring whatever light they bring.